Khalifa Haftar has taken Libya ever closer to civil war in recent days. His forces seized 4 oil ports, effectively taking control of Libya's economy. The UN, the US and several European countries have condemned him and demanded he back off. But Haftar's won promotion to Field Marshal for his efforts from a rival government in Tobruk. And on Friday, Haftar won Cairo's support too. It's publicly backed his oil crescent offensive. Speaking to the state news agency Mina, Egypt's foreign minister Sameh Shoukry says these are important efforts of the National Army of Libya to ensure the security and stability of the territories, as well as the safety of Libyan oil resources. And Shoukry branded the reaction from the US and Europe as hasty and not taking into account the domestic situation in Libya. Egypt has been providing military support to Haftar since 2014. It sees him as a major ally against radical Islam.
Khalifa
Haftar is a main opponent of the war against terrorism in Libya, and the terrorist groups are still very much active in Libya. Egypt is giving the fight on terrorism a priority, and it's a source of danger on Egypt's security, especially as we hear the warnings from the West lately that ISIL militants might flee to Libya's neighbors, especially Egypt and Tunisia.
Shoukry has been meeting Libya's political rivals in recent months to mediate. Cairo says it supports the UN's efforts to forge a unity government, but that Haftar must be given a prominent role.
It's essential for Egypt not to push him out of the political equation. He's vital in the war on terrorism. Egypt is adamant on eradicating terrorism and on reaching a political solution to the differences between the Libyan sides in issues such as the parliament, the Sarraj government, and the future role of the Haftar politically or militarily.
Still, many fear this week's developments will worsen the crisis. The Tripoli government says the seizure of the ports marks a turning point for Libya. There's a lot at stake for the wider region too. Libya's infighting could become the lifeline for ISIL, which has been losing ground in Libya lately. Any future chaos could be the best opportunity for the terrorist group to flourish in the oil-rich North African nation. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Right, let's get you more on that story now. I'm joined live from Cairo by CCTV's Yasser Hakim. Also joining us is CCTV's Daniel Righteous in Washington. Yasser, let's start with you. Egypt finally breaking its silence and taking the controversial stance of continuing its support for Khalifa Haftar. What more can you tell us about that statement released by the Egyptian government?
Yes, the Egyptian government has thrown its support behind Haftar, an ally, for more than 2 years now. They've been working together on fighting terrorism in Libya. Egypt has been offering military and financial support to the Libyan forces led by Khalifa Haftar, and they feel that he's the legitimate leader for the that should be a legitimate army, Libyan army at this point. But Egypt also said that it will stick by the Sukhairat agreement that was signed by the different political parties under the sponsorship of the UN, and it hopes that a government, a coalition government, would be formed that will be accepted by all sides, regardless of what Egypt's stance concerning Khalifa Haftar at this point.
Well, of course, Daniel, let's turn to you now. This response from Egypt is definitely rather in contrast to the US and the UN. What does Washington make then of Egypt's decision to continue supporting Haftar?
Well, I think it's firstly interesting to reflect on how far we've come with General Haftar, because this was someone who was once Muammar Gaddafi's right-hand man in the military, then went on a campaign in Chad which failed, and Haftar became effectively a US CIA asset. Attempts to instigate a coup were not successful, and then what happened is Haftar essentially retired and came to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., the quiet, leafy suburbs. The next thing the US authorities know, Haftar is interested in reviving his military and political career in Libya and has become a huge thorn in the side of US policy. And within the last couple of hours, the US State Department has told me this: the Government of National Accord is Libya's sole legitimate recipient of international security assistance, as the international community made clear in its May 16th communique. All Libyan forces, including General Haftar and the Libyan National Army, should unite under the GNA's civilian command. The statement goes on to say, now is the time for Libya to build a national military force capable of securing and uniting the country. Disunity and lack of coordination among Libyan forces only benefits Daesh and the other violent extremists. So a polar opposite position from the US State Department.
Well, Yasser, coming back to you now, if we just look at what Daniel has just said, some would suggest that the stage is set for a civil war in Libya. Now, should that happen, do you think Egypt would continue to back General Haftar over the unity government?
Now, I don't think any side, especially Egypt, will leave the situation to escalate into a civil war. Countries like Egypt will be one of the first to be affected by any civil war in Libya. And just I got an information just a moments ago that the Fayez Sarraj, the head of the Presidential Council, is in Cairo. He just arrived a few moments ago. Of course, it's all behind back doors. And also the head of the parliament that is opposing, that is leading Haftar's side, is also in Cairo now, Aqila Saleh. So we've seen now that Egypt is hosting both sides now, the one that is backing Haftar and the Presidential Council that has condemned Haftar. I think Egypt is trying very hard now to try to diffuse the situation, try to reach some kind of an agreement between both sides and try to avoid this scenario of a civil war that no one wants. Even if Egypt is backing Haftar, it doesn't mean that it's accepting that Haftar would clash with the other side. No, I believe that at this point, Egypt is trying to reach some kind of consensus between all sides. And from the experts I've been talking to here and officials in the last few days, they feel that maybe a new cabinet that will not be so Islamist as the one that is there now, the coalition government that has been rejected a week ago, has had a more Islamist leverage, while the Islamists had lost the elections, the parliamentary elections at the beginning of the year. And they want a more balanced between both sides coalition government, whereby Khalifa Haftar could be the Minister of Defense. Maybe at this point, if Fayez Sarraj and the UN-backed Presidential Council agree to that, then maybe we can see an end to the standoff.
And Daniel, what do you think might be the response from Washington on that, as we see Egypt, of course, playing a very important role in the conflict in Libya and trying to find a resolution, looking at Haftar perhaps being Minister of Defense? How will Egypt's stance likely shape Washington's policy on the crisis in Libya?
Well, the hint comes in the statement I just read. It says the Government of National Accord is Libya's sole legitimate recipient of international security assistance. The problem going forward for the US-Egypt relationship may be this. Haftar is essentially saying, Egypt, can you come in and offer us security assistance? It comes in the context of this recent takeover of oil fields. Meanwhile, part of US funding to the Egyptian military, that military aid has been directed at securing Egypt's border with Libya. If they are going to be using US military aid to do something that contradicts US and other international policy on the formation of a government of national accord, then that could be highly problematic. But there is in this statement an opening, I think, for some accommodation of Haftar. If that happens, then I think the two sides, the Egyptians and the Americans, can reach some kind of accommodation and can find a way forward in Libya. But it's a huge open question, and as I said earlier, Haftar at the moment is seen as a huge thorn in the side of US-Libya policy.
Indeed, and let's hope that they can find some wiggle room at least in order to prevent a civil war. CCTV's Yasser Hakim live for us there in Cairo, and of course Daniel Wright is joining us from Washington. Thank you to you both.